Welcome to TVBS Meeting Room, where we tackle global issues with a view from Taiwan. I'm your host, Hsiao. Almost every foreign policy-focused think tank in Washington, D.C. has a program focused on China, Taiwan, and China or Taiwan. However, Global Taiwan Institute is the only one that's founded by Taiwanese Americans across different generations and takes a Taiwan-centered approach. Over the years, it's grown and attracted some of the top foreign policy thinkers to its orbit. Today, we're speaking to its executive director, Russell Hsiao Liangqi, to help analyze how think tanks and policymakers have approached Taiwan issues over the years. Welcome, Russell.
Thank you very much, Wenchi. It's delightful for me to be here.
So you've been involved in Taiwan-related discussions in DC for a long time. So tell us how Global Taiwan Institute came about and how it's differentiating itself from the other think tanks in Washington, D.C.
Well, thank you for that question, Wenchi. You're right. I've been a very close observer of the Taiwan, China, Asia policy space now for nearly 20 years. And over the course of those professional experiences that I've had at various think tanks and research institutions, I've noticed that there were, several gaps in how Taiwan issues, as well as the overall sort of tenure, as well as discussions surrounding Taiwan, had been shaped by several tendencies in which the DC broader policy community addressed issues related to Taiwan. And those tendencies centered on really a tendency to sort of focus on Taiwan in 4-year cycles. So, we're sort of at the tail end of that cycle again with an election that was just held in January earlier this year. But, the attention in Washington, D.C. tends to focus on Taiwan when there's, a national elections, with the sort of the focus being on what might change as a result of, the elections. But, I think you and I both know that Taiwan is a very dynamic society, and cross-strait relations, as tense as it is and seemingly unmovable or unshapable, also has a lot of dynamics at play as well. And that tendency to really only focus on Taiwan and 4-year cycle really presents a large gap in people's understanding about Taiwan when you try to sort of consume all the developments that are occurring within Taiwan and around Taiwan in those 4-year cycles. The other tendency is to treat Taiwan policy as a subset of a China policy. Now, I think that has changed over the course of the last decade, I would add. But I think my organization, as well as those who support a more robust US-Taiwan relationship, understands and appreciates that Taiwan has its own intrinsic value. And that, while for historic reasons, structural reasons, that may have been the case that Taiwan policy was treated as a subset of the China policy for many decades, that really ignores and overlooks many of the important features and assets that Taiwan can bring to the table with regards to broader international policy issues. And as a result of sort of this traditional structure and mindset of how people in the DC policy community address Taiwan in this sense, we were under leveraging, in my view, the important role that Taiwan can play. And the third and final, I think, tendency that sort of dominated the way in which Taiwan policy and issues were addressed in DC is, really a hyper focus on, defense and military issues. Now, clearly, this is an important and existential issue for Taiwan, but nevertheless, I think there is a much broader set of important matters that concerns both the well-being of the Taiwanese people, as well as for the American people to better understand, the importance, the interests, as well as values that Taiwan can bring to the international world stage. That while again a hyper focus on the defense and military dynamics in U.S. Taiwan relations or cross-strait relations, really sucks up all the air in our discussions about Taiwan and the importance of Taiwan. And so, really, the origins of the necessity to create a think tank focused exclusively on Taiwan, is really intended to address these three tendencies. And really, this organization could not have come about without the really the passion and the long-standing support of the Taiwanese American community for issues related to Taiwan that have created institutions at the very grassroots levels, as well as community organizations that bring about a stronger sense of identity and community within the United States and internationally. And the founders of GTI, were really those people who have been involved in this movement to help support a more robust U.S. Taiwan relationship and a broader understanding about Taiwan and its people here in the United States. And I think the idea is that we really want to be able to cultivate a new generation of of advocates, of supporters, of intellectuals, who have a broader understanding and an appreciation for Taiwan and the role that Taiwan can play in the broader policy discussions here in the United States.
Well, that was a really, really good and rich, I would say, summary of the thinking, even though, it's decades of work, obviously, and understanding. I wanted to specifically follow up on a few points that you mentioned, in particular, sort of the changing focus of Taiwan issue from sort of the very original, is always putting Taiwan as a subset of the broader China issues. If we look at the government structure, if we look at all the programs, how they're organized, is still in most think tanks is part of the China program. And so what do you think is driving those changes, right? It seems that DC is more receptive to the idea of discussing Taiwan as a standalone issue. As you mentioned, GTI was founded in 2016. Do you think the timing with, the Trump administration played a role? And then second, obviously, economic security has become a major tension point between U.S. and China, and therefore, Taiwan's technology, semiconductors, etc., also now is getting more attention. Do you think these are sort of the two driving forces, or are we missing something else?
You're exactly right, Wenxie. I mean, I think just going back to your earlier sort of point about the structure of how Taiwan issues are addressed by think tanks and research institutions is that they tend to function as a subset of a broader sort of China approach or policy shop, and and that's reflected both not only in terms of the departments or institutions that have China programs and Taiwan is a subset of within those programs, but also in personnel, right? In terms of whether or not, even when there are researchers in those shops that have the Taiwan portfolio, they are spending the majority of their time, focused on China-related research, and and really a marginal amount of time comparatively with regards focusing just on Taiwan. And so, I think one of our competitive differentiators here at GTI is that our researchers, our affiliates, our programs, are really focused Taiwan-centered and really intended to be able to really focus on Taiwan entirely. Certainly, its relationship with the People's Republic of China, is an important element of that, but it is not the defining element of that. And so I think that's a key point that I like to add. With regards to the changes in how Taiwan is addressed and talked about here in Washington, D.C. I really do think that there's been a profound change over the last 2 decades in perceptions about Taiwan here in the United States. This is reflected, I think, both in terms of the approach that you also underscored in how the U.S. Policy community addressed Taiwan as a standalone issue, or beginning to do so. And I think this is a function of, at least two key variables, right? The one of which is a growing awareness, within the American public about Taiwan. And this growing awareness is both comes from an understanding of the importance of the strategic value, of Taiwan's democracy, as well as its strategic value in a more broader geostrategic sense. This is also related in part to the concerns also within the United States with regards to the PRC's threats to Taiwan, but not only to Taiwan, but the broader Western Pacific as well, to U.S. allies and like-minded partners, and also the threats that it poses to the homeland of the United States. And I think this broader understanding that, the intentions and the capabilities that the People's Republic of China has been developing as not only it's not only focused on Taiwan, it extends beyond Taiwan, I think, contributes to a broader understanding about the importance of Taiwan, not only to, of course, the protection of democratic values, but the broader geostrategic interests that stems from an understanding of the key role that Taiwan plays in the high technology supply chain, for one, the economic vibrancy of Taiwan and the dynamic US-Taiwan trade relationship. Oftentimes people forget the fact that Taiwan is, the ninth or eighth, largest trading partner of the United States. And this is an important dimension of the US-Taiwan relationship that often gets neglected or shortchanged in previous discussions about Taiwan, when, you really have this important linkages between the two economies that really goes towards the well-being and the economic vibrancy of the United States and Taiwan. And I think this broader understanding lends to a broader appreciation and important understanding that we need to widen the apertures of our discussions about Taiwan to be able to really better leverage this important and dynamic relationship in ways that can be mutually beneficial to both the Taiwanese people as well as to the American people. And, I think a think tank really plays a vital role in that regard, in being able to really utilize both our research capacity in producing, independent and, original research related to Taiwan, but also utilizing our convening function as an organization to be able to bring people together, to bring, different experts from various disciplines to address the multifaceted dynamics of Taiwan's potential role in other global issues. And so I think these are really the variables that have contributed to this profound discussion. Now, I think that this attention to Taiwan, the shift in how we address Taiwan, has been a gradual, sort of process that has evolved in the last, 20 years. But it certainly has, accelerated, in the last 8 years. And that is, I think, a function of the changes in which the People's Republic of China has really sort of taken off its mask and really just dispense with all the pretenses of its peaceful intentions with regards to Taiwan. And while I think many of us in the analytical community that have focused on the People's Republic of China's capabilities as well as its political motivations have been trying to sound the alarm with regards to the impact of China's rise for the world stage. I think it's only been really in the last 8 years or so that the broader policy community here in Washington has really waken up to that reality, and you see that sort of that broader sort of contours of that change really stems from a recognition that the previous approach to trying to integrate China into the international institution, international world stage has failed, frankly speaking, and that and actually, as a matter of fact, the world has been changing as a function of China's rise, and Taiwan in that context really plays a very presents a very stark contrast to the type of model that the Chinese regime across the strait offers. And as such, I think there is a deeper and broader appreciation for Taiwan. And I think, a think tank like ours that's, again, exclusively focused on Taiwan can do a lot in being able to, to really to do the research, to go beyond the sort of the superficial level understanding of, say, soft power or areas of sort of hard power research, and dive into understanding really what are the sort of the dynamics that are shaping both issues within Taiwan, but more broadly, across the Indo-Pacific region, and then being able to translate that into the discussions that we are having here within the broader policy community in Washington, D.C., and hopefully, with greater accessibility and engagements with the international community, to also be able to help inform discussions outside of the United States as well.
Yeah, I know you have a lot you want to share, but we may have to, pack it into shorter answers if possible. I do want to, really follow on this, issue that may be more challenging for you to respond, but you have to, which is, is there any difference between a Democratic and Republican Party approach to Taiwan? I think it's impossible not to notice how the Republicans tend to be much more outspoken in terms of their support for Taiwan. Can you explain, is that really the case, or is it just sort of acting out differently? What is your own analysis?
Yeah, that's a great question, Wenchi. It's one that I think I'm often asked, and I never really have a perfect answer to address that. It's something that I also continue to closely observe and try to understand from an observer's standpoint. But I would say this, though. I think in a city and an institution that's plagued by partisanship, I think Taiwan policy stands out remarkably as a strong demonstration of the power and influence of bipartisanship, and bipartisan support for Taiwan remains strong, and it remains a point of consensus that in a city where there are few issues on which the different political parties can agree on, support for Taiwan is certainly not one of them, right? And so that is a really important feature that cannot be overlooked in how the different political parties address Taiwan issues. Now, that being said, I think that there are some nuances and some observable, differences in terms of how different administrations, for instance, different Republican or Democratic administrations have approached, issues related to Taiwan, and that I think stems from a function of its broader sort of approaches to foreign policy issues. And so, on the one hand, I think the Republicans tend to have a stronger emphasis on defense and security issues and support for Taiwan in those regards. Whereas, I think the Democratic administrations, as well as Democratic Party in general, stand for a broader policy approach that emphasizes values in international institutions. And I think in terms of how the two political parties have placed their emphasis in how to support Taiwan are reflected in how different sort of initiatives are emphasized either in a Republican or a Democratic administration. Now, that also being said, just one final point on this is that I think that there's a greater degree of convergence now than ever before in terms of the policy approaches of the two political parties. And you see that to an extent reflected in the continuity of the approaches taken by from the Trump administration onwards to the Biden administration, and I think that is a important signal of the sort of consolidation of the approaches towards Taiwan that I think is vital to really having a more comprehensive approach, holistic approach, to Taiwan.
I think it's important to know for sure, right? There are many factors at play over the last, let's just say 2 administrations when it comes to Taiwan policy. I can't help but notice still, right? For example, even though Taiwan is largely a bipartisan issue now, it's harder to get the Democrats to be more outspoken to support Taiwan. And that is, just a fact, whether it's because the Democrats still want to, relatively have a less sort of anti-China stance or something else. It is very interesting to know that. However, I just, spoke to someone else who basically said, it was about Australian politics, right? So the substance, this is how he framed it, the substance of it, the support doesn't vary as much. It's more about what do you speak out, right? So speak more, act less, or, more or less the same, or you speak less, but you act the same. So basically, I thought there was an interesting way to frame it, right? So maybe in the media, what a lot of people are seeing is that Republicans tend to be more outspoken, but in substance, I think, maybe the Democrats would argue that they're not doing less, or they're just thinking about Taiwan in a different way. But that doesn't mean their support for Taiwan is any less than the Republicans. I thought it's an interesting point.
That is a very interesting point, and I would just add a final sort of point to that also, which is that changes sometimes also as well. I mean, think about the fact, well, not necessarily in the same exact way, but in terms of being more outspoken and how the different parties approaches sort of vocalizing support for Taiwan, is the fact that we have a Democratic president now that has stated openly 4 times that he would come to the defense of Taiwan if militarily, if the Chinese invaded Taiwan. And I think that is a remarkable demonstration of public support for Taiwan's defense that came from a Democratic president. So I do think, while traditionally, yes, the Republicans have been, vocally supportive of Taiwan, have stood in strong support for Taiwan's defense, to include also, statements made by, the President George W. Bush, who had also indicated previously that, he would do whatever it takes to defend Taiwan. But that, there are these convergences now that that I think again reflects on an important and often not emphasized enough convergence in our approaches. Yeah.
Well, we have to talk about the possibility of a second Trump administration. And you actually, especially through GTI, have been very collaborative with some of the former first Trump administration officials. And many of them are, in my view, outstanding policy thinkers. And so, how do you think a second Trump administration may approach Taiwan differently, or maybe not that differently? Do you feel like there's still some more room for new and creative policies?
Well, I'll have to be honest with you, and I think it's way too early to say with any degree of confidence, and what a potential second Trump administration would do. And I think anyone who claims that they know aren't being, completely honest, about that. I mean, the former president thrives on uncertainty, and I think that is a key element of his approach to policy in general, and that applies to foreign policy as well. I do think it's important to be, if there were to be a second Trump administration, to really focus less about what he says and more about what he does and what his administration, and more importantly, what his administration officials do. And I think you're right. Whatever one may think about, President Trump's own views with regards to Taiwan, and he hasn't expressed many of those views publicly, with regards to Taiwan. His administration, his former administration was staffed with a lot of, really, I think, really important and smart policy people that took, and then ultimately made the right call in terms of strengthening ties with Taiwan. Whether it is a second Biden administration or a second Trump administration, I think it's important to take a step back and look at the broader structural, issues that are going to shape, both whether it's a Biden administration or a Trump administration. That I think it's going to be here to stay, for the long term. And I think that recognition of this reality, of this new reality, is reflected in the continuity in the approaches that we've seen from the Trump administration onwards to the Biden administration, and its approach to, strategic competition with China, and really engaging, focusing on more on economic security issues that are going to be critical to the this future development of both the United States as well as Western Pacific. And so, my sense is that, in a second Trump administration, that is going to be, that there will be more continuity there, I think, in the approach of strategic competition with China, and perhaps, leveraging more, economic tools there in terms of its approach.
Yeah, it sounds like there's definitely, at least in the technology space, the trade space, there's going to be more, even coming from a potential second Trump administration. Lai Ching-te, who's the new president of Taiwan, what do you think will be his greatest challenges dealing with the U.S. over the next few years?
Yeah, I think, look, I think President Lai has, indicated in a very, I think, clear way that he intends to continue the policies of his predecessor, President Tsai Ing-wen. And I think that has sent an important, reassuring signal to the United States that he will maintain stability to the best of his ability, within the Taiwan Strait. I think there are going to be a confluence of factors that will, however, complicate the way in which President Lai can continue to steady the course in the turbulent waters across the strait. And those are going to be active efforts on the part of.
And what are these? What are these?
Yes. Yeah. So these are going to be active efforts on the part of the PRC to drive a wedge between Lai and the United States. I think, over the course of the campaign, it's been openly expressed about concerns with regards to, previous statements that the president has made with regards to his stance on, Taiwanese independence. I think those issues have been largely addressed in the policy statements that he has made, both in his inauguration speech as well as other assurances made. However, I think the Chinese Communist Party will continue a comprehensive propaganda and political warfare campaign to drive a wedge between both the United States and Taiwan by also working with actors within the United States who are also now, some of which are calling for the need for sending greater assurances to Beijing in order to, calm the waters of Taiwan Strait. I think ignoring the reality that the onus is really on Beijing, in terms of the destabilizing actions that it has taken against Taiwan.
I think, I think you can say it is, Beijing driving the wedge, but I don't think it's fair to say that, Washington, D.C. also still a lot of people have questions about Lai Ching-te. I mean, partially just because they haven't known him for a while, right? If you remember, even Tsai Ing-wen, it took them a long time to actually eventually trust Tsai Ing-wen because of their distrust in the DPP and the previous experience with Chen Shui-bian. So I think at the end of the day, the DPP has to bear the burden. It takes a long time to regain or gain the trust, and it will probably take Lai a while as well to gain the trust, regardless of what Beijing is doing. And so, we're coming to the end of the program. I have to ask you, who do you admire the most among the DC Taiwan thinkers, and why?
It would be unfair for me to single out any particular persons. I mean, there are so many, strong supporters of Taiwan, and in establishing this organization, I've only been. Yeah,
but I need you to give you a few names because so many of them are working on Taiwan now. Sometimes it's really hard to tell, how committed they are, and some of them have been, at the trenches for decades, right? Who do I the most?
All right. With the caveat that this is, of course, not this is certainly a non-exhaustive list, but I'll name two that really stand out to me right now. I think, one would be retired Lieutenant General Chip Gregson, and the other would be Ambassador Stephen Young. And I think that, these two individuals who, represent, both the diplomatic as well as the defense, communities here in the United States, really represent a combination of the important approaches that the holistic approach that the United States has lacked in its approach to Taiwan traditionally, and the commitment and the interest and their unrelenting support both for Taiwan as well as GTI over the years since our founding. I think really stand out to me as really the type of tradition that we want to sort of continue to pass on to future policymakers to think about Taiwan, not only in the defense and security space, but also more holistic in the diplomatic and political space as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us today, Russell. I want to say, for those who don't know, Russell and a few others truly have been driving the Taiwan Center approach to think about Taiwan over the years. And it's, truly wonderful to see how Taiwan is receiving attention in a different way now. And of course, we hope that that attention will not go away, but instead, and it's not in the sort of context of US-China competition, but more treating Taiwan as its own, and because Taiwan has so much value to add to the world community, as well as just US-Taiwan relationship alone. So thank you for speaking to us.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay. All right.